Good morning, Metalheads Internet. Welcome to a new episode of the Metal Meltdown, and today we're looking at all of the albums that I missed in the month of November 2019. November was a lot more action-packed than I had initially anticipated it would be. There were a lot of really cool releases from all the different spectrums and corners of heavy metal music. We had some really great unconventional death metal from bands like Cannabis Corpse and Blood Incantation. We had some really great unconventional black metal from artists such as Abigail Williams and arguably Lord Mantis. Not quite sure where they fall into there, but they definitely lean more towards the black than the death, so fucking be it. Nawabum Underdog's Angel Witch came back with their strongest album in a very long time. Deathcore pioneers and the Canadian metal icons Despised Icon put out a remarkably heavy record. And speaking of remarkably heavy, the long-awaited Death Atlas from Cattle Decapitation. Holy fuck, what a record that is. To be honest, it even feels like I didn't really miss a whole lot, but that simply isn't the case. As usual, there were some things that unfortunately fell beneath the cracks, that unfortunately did not get the full attention that perhaps some think that they may have deserved. Hence this video, hence why we're here, so let's get right into it. Let's talk about all of the albums that I feel I missed in the month of November 2019. First up, the Age of Defiance EP from Prong, an American alt-metal, groove metal band that I know a little bit about. I'm familiar in particular with their first couple albums, but truthfully, I'm not so familiar with their modern output. In fact, off the top of my head, I don't ever even remember reviewing any of their modern records on here. And if I have, then it was clearly a long fucking time ago, because again, I honestly don't fucking remember it. And Age of Defiance is a solid record. It definitely seems a little different from the Prong I remember, but again, keeping in mind, I don't fucking know shit about their modern material, so c'est la vie. Got some cool grooves, got some cool melodies, it combines in a pretty satisfying fashion. The EP ends at a pretty sharp 19 minutes. Not really a huge fan of Rude Awakening and its monotonous slow pace and its monotonous drudgy guitar work, but hey, 4 out of 5 certainly ain't bad. It doesn't necessarily excite me enough to want to look up more of Prong's more modern material, but for what it was a perfectly fine, solid, fun little piece of headbanging joy. Next up, another EP, this one out of the Frontline trench, from Sodom underground thrash kings, and my god, do they take advantage of that title on this EP. I mean, this is some ripping, ferocious stuff. Not that I expected otherwise, mind you, but nonetheless, I was taken back a little bit by how incredibly violent and abrasive Sodom are on this short little EP. Hell, I would go as far as to say that the 3 original tracks on this EP probably rank as some of the strongest thrash metal I've heard this year. I'm also down with the re-recording of Agent Orange, even if it doesn't feel inherently and atmospherically that much different. It does add a professional polish to the song that it did not originally have, and it's also just inherently really fun. And the live track Bomb and Hagel is pretty great too, even if it is mixed a lot louder than some of the other tracks on this record, or at least I felt it was. The only other thing I'll say is that for an EP, it's pretty lengthy. I mean, it's 28 minutes. I have literally listened to full studio albums that are that length and even shorter. Not exactly a deal breaker or anything, but it does pave the way for an argument that they could trim a little bit of fat here and there. Regardless, I don't really picture anyone being really that upset, even if they do have that concern, considering the high quality and high energy of this release. Next up, Reformat and Reboot from dark metalcore crew H.A.A.Q, and this is a particularly interesting release because it's not technically a studio album. This is actually a remix album comprised of rearranged tracks from their previous record, The Well-Intentioned Virus, which I reviewed almost 3 years ago on this channel. I really enjoyed that record when it came out too. It was probably my favorite metalcore album that year, so I was kind of interested to hear this remix record. You know, I was excited to hear how H.A.A.Q and the various producers that they brought into this would reinterpret some of those devastatingly powerful cuts. The results are a little bit mixed. In its weakest moments, it even reminds me of the bombastic dubstep metal of an artist like Counterparts, but it is kind of fascinating nonetheless, and there are some songs that get a genuine boost from this remix format. Take, for instance, Xenophile, remixed by Joseph Milligan, which now embraces this kind of industrial metal carnage in the vein of Ministry and Agoraphobic Nosebleed. Or for that matter, Apocalypse 2.0, which ends up embracing this kind of industrial drone flavor, something that would even fit in with any number of tracks from Sun. Not quite as stretched out, mind you, but, you know, same general vibe. I'm not really sure how people will respond to this record. They're not the most well-known band in the world, so it's very likely for some people this could even be their first encounter with H.A.A.Q. If you do happen to fall into that category, I would recommend looking up the Well-Intentioned Virus first, and then maybe picking out the tracks that I've mentioned, and then digging into this. And if you also fall into the category of being one of those people that thinks like electronic stuff in your metal is fake, it's for posers, then just stay the fuck away. Don't even argue. I don't want to hear it. No one wants to hear it. Just go. Leave us alone. But yeah, if you know this record and you're open-minded to electronic music, then there is certainly a lot of interesting stuff to sink your teeth into here. Next up, Nothing Left to Love from Canadian melodic hardcore crew Counterparts. Yeah, that's right, they're Canadian. That means they were going to show up on here eventually, even if they fucking sucked. And yes, they're Canadian. And yes, not only are they Canadian, but they're from Hamilton, Ontario, which is only one town over from where I live in Mississauga. So, how you doing, guys? What's up? I like this record. It's got a lot of energy, got a lot of balls, got a lot of attitude. It's not the most sophistically written or arranged. In fact, it's inarguably pretty generic. What it lacks in originality, it makes up for in confidence, in power, in energy. They just put so much fucking rage and emotion into this, it becomes a little difficult not to bang your head along. Even the breakdowns on this. I'm not usually a huge fan of breakdowns, but the breakdowns were actually really effective, and there were some really great guitar melodies across the record, and I love the vocals as well. Probably wouldn't change your mind if you're not the biggest fan of metalcore and melodic hardcore, but if you are a big fan of those respective genres, you really can't go wrong with this. It's a really solid and enjoyable record. Next up, Internal Atomics from Stray from the Path, an album that I've heard a little bit about, actually. In fact, one of our regular viewers here on the Metal Meltdown, Trevor Burns, compared them to Rage Against the Machine, lyrically and aesthetically speaking. And Trevor, with respect, I think that might have been a bit of a stretch. I mean, they definitely have a lot of attitude, but they don't quite have the same vocal spitfire as Zach De La Rocha. They're not quite as politically conscious, intelligent, and rebellious as that band. But I'll give you this, Trevor. I did enjoy this record. I enjoyed how explosive the material is. I enjoyed how enthusiastic it is. I enjoyed how sharp it is. I enjoyed the subtle variety spread across the record, like on a song like Fortune Teller, which did definitely have a little bit of a rap metal flourish to it alongside some really spastic drums. Compare that to Actions Not Words, which was a much more explosive, more traditional 90s hardcore cut in the vein of Hatebreed with some modern attitude as well. With a little bit of time and work, I can definitely see this band releasing an absolute banger via their next record, but for now, this one, Internal Atomics, pretty fucking fun. Another solid record from the world of metalcore, actually. I guess it's a good month if you're into metalcore. Next up is Ritual from the Tygers of Tang, an album that I had initially shown some interest in reviewing while I was planning out my month, but Angel Witch eventually took importance, so Tygers of Tang kind of got pushed to the side. And for the record, if you are looking for a dose of Nawabum 80s heavy metal, Angel of Light from Angel Witch is probably the stronger record to go for, but I will say to Tygers, this is a pretty solid record nonetheless. I mean, it's pretty raw, pretty clear, pretty honest. They don't hide anything. They're not interested in advancing anything. They come in, they play their 80s heavy metal sound, and they do it with confidence and clarity. And it's pretty entertaining. I mean, there's some cool raucous cuts like Raise Some Hell, some more anthemic cuts like Destiny, and it all works pretty well. I do think it's a little bit too long for its own good, and I think I would personally prefer a more professional, polished sound, but for what it is, it's pretty solid. And if you're looking for another dose of 80s heavy metal after Angel Witch, or maybe that just didn't do it for you, definitely give this a shot. Next up, The Age of Entitlement from English thrash metal crew Acid Rain, a band that I know a little bit about. Their first record in particular, The Fear, does indeed ring a couple bells. I also know this is their first album in nearly 30 fucking years. Holy shit, that's a long time to step away from the scene. I don't know what they've been doing in that time, but I can tell you that if you are someone who's been pining for Acid Rain, I can tell you that if you're someone who's been pining for some powerful English thrash, then you will definitely be very satisfied with the Age of Entitlement. I mean, it's got razor-sharp riffs, it's got battering drums, it's got huge gang vocals, this almost punky crossover attitude to it without straying too far into DRI or Suicidal Tendencies-esque territory, retaining a bit of their own unique thrash charm. I do think that, weirdly, at times the band gets a little bit ahead of themselves and instruments start to bleed together in the sound mix, but you could argue there that it adds to the chaos and the spirit of the record, to which I would say, you're not wrong. I had actually thought about reviewing this record. I ultimately didn't because, frankly, I don't have much more to say about it beyond exactly what I just said. I mean, it's an enjoyable record, but there's not much to dig into lyrically or musically speaking. It's not a particularly forward-thinking or progressive album. It's really only focused on playing hyper-fast in-your-face thrash. And if you're not interested in exactly that, I don't see any reason to actually check out this fucking thing. Fair warning. But hey, I know for a fact that so many of y'all are indeed hungry for exactly that, in which case you definitely cannot go wrong with this seriously entertaining, thrilling record. Next up, Get Loud from Agnostic front hardcore crossover thrash Titans. And honestly, I don't really have much to say about this record that I didn't already say about the Acid Rain album. It's explosive, it's energetic, it's everything that I think thrash fans are looking for right now. It's not the sharpest tool in the box, but fuck it, it works perfectly fine for what it is. I think this album succeeds over Acid Rain, though, by being a little bit more professionally handled and arranged, and also by being shorter, therefore inherently more digestible. So I would say if you're at a record store, you gotta pick between the two. I would personally pick this, but you can't go wrong with either, ultimately. Another seriously entertaining record from the world of thrash and hardcore music. This is just a really great month for hardcore and all of its different branches like crossover thrash and metalcore, isn't it? Fun time to be a hardcore guy. Next up, Nephilim Grove from November's Doom, who clearly sensed that I was having way too much fun with all of this aforementioned hardcore and thrash metal and decided, you know what Robert needs? Robert needs to be fucking depressed. Robert needs to be fucking miserable, so let's throw some really spooky, dreary, gloomy shit at him. I mean, this entire record, as heavy as it gets, as powerful as its instrumentation gets, is so dreary. The soundscapes, the vocals, it just feels kind of miserable, which I get is the point, for the record. I totally understand that that's the fucking point. But it really just kind of killed my mood coming out of these really enthusiastic records, these really energetic, empowering records. But again, I want to make it clear, I acknowledge that that's the fucking point. This is doom metal, and this is probably one of doom metal's most emotional and inherently miserable bands. I like that it isn't just miserable doom, though. There's actually a lot of diversity and nuance in this record. Take, for instance, in the title track Nephilim Grove, which embraces this kind of Opethian folky flair with these winding acoustic guitars transcending in and out of the sound mix, some really great clean vocals, eventually escalating to a big explosive bash of death metal vocals. Or for that matter, following track What We Become, which kind of embraces this epic doom sense of scale and twisting it into something much more melancholic and smoky. All in all, I really enjoy this record, and in fact, I wouldn't have minded reviewing this on the Metal Meltdown, but c'est la vie, we're already here, I've already done my bit. If you like some miserable shit, if you like doom and gloom, definitely check this out. Next up, Tower of the Morbid. As far as I can tell, this is the debut album from Paganizer, old school death metal style band, with a particularly explosive gentleman on lead vocals. I mean, that's at least the first thing I noticed about this thing. The vocals just launch themselves out of this grim, murky, ancient death metal sound. Like, this dude seriously sounds like some kind of demon fucking general leading his minions into the bowels of fucking hell. He arguably does take away from the rest of the album as a result, but maybe that's a good thing, because the music, while definitely pretty energetic and entertaining, not exactly the most original shit. And don't get me wrong, it works perfectly fine, particularly alongside this gentleman's windpipes. But if this vocalist was not quite as enthusiastic, and if this music wasn't quite as inherently enthusiastically performed as well as a result, it would ultimately boil down to being a pretty by-the-books death metal record, something that truthfully would not be on my radar in 2019, considering the wealth of fantastic death metal that's been thrown our way. It's definitely grisly and gruesome, and death metal fans are going to have a lot of fun with it. I certainly had a lot of fun with it. But is it a record that's going to stay with me for a long time? Is it going to replace albums from Venom Prison or Tomb Mold on my regular playlist? Probably not. But who knows, with the amount of energy these guys are emitting already on a debut album, maybe the next record will replace Venom Prism and Tomb Mold. We'll see. I'll be keeping a close eye on these guys. Next up, the Palms of Sorrowed Kings from Obsequiae? Obsequiae? I don't fucking know. But I do know that a lot of people have been talking about this. Our resident authority on extreme music, Mr. Ty Tilley in particular, has been posting a lot about this on his Instagram. And while I definitely see the appeal in this, I also kind of feel like maybe this is a little overhyped. I feel like this band has a little bit of ways to go before they release a magnum opus. Which isn't to say there isn't really good stuff on here. I think that the music formula they've concocted is really cool. This fusion of all of these epic and powerful sounds and styles from doom metal, black metal, folk metal. I particularly like this almost medieval kind of aesthetic that goes across the entire record. It even reminds me of some of the most primitive recordings from Manila Road, but filtered through more of an epic, folky doom. But on that note, I'm also not the biggest fan of Manila Road. Their stuff's pretty hit and miss for me, and it ultimately does usually come down to the sound mix. And that's ultimately where my big issue with this comes in. I just don't think this is a very good sound mix at all. The riffs would benefit from something a lot beefier. The synths and the vocals would benefit from something a lot more professional. The drums would benefit from something a lot stronger. I would even go as far as to recommend a remaster, if we're being fully honest. But hey, clearly a lot of people have been willing to look past that because I keep hearing about this thing. And if that's the case, then honestly, that's great. I mean that. There's enough good stuff on here that if you're willing to look past those issues, you will have a fun time. So yeah, this album isn't for me, but there are enough cool ideas on here that I will be keeping a close eye on this band in the future nonetheless. I think they're on the verge of something really exciting. And finally, let's wrap this up with a surprise release from avant-garde black metal crew Liturgy, entitled H.A.A.Q. Or I assume it's titled H.A.A.Q. That's at least how it's spelled. This is a record I actually spent a lot of time with. A lot of time really sinking my teeth into it, trying to understand all of its nooks and crannies, all of its weird offbeat songs, all of its weird notes, all of its weird soundscapes and musical concepts. And it never quite really sunk in. It is such an inherently weird, bizarre, and off-putting record. This is not an album for casual listening. I don't even think your average black metal fan would be super into this. In fact, I'd be willing to argue that your average black metal fan would probably dismiss this as some fake poser garbage. It says, that's not real, that's not true, that's not cult. And while I don't agree with the rage and the elitist attitude behind those statements, I do agree that this doesn't exactly have much in common with the world of Mayhem and Bathory and Emperor. I mean, this honestly has more in common aesthetically with bands like the Dillinger Escape Plan than it does with, you know, Mayhem or Bathory or Emperor. But that's also what I really like about it. I like how challenging this is. I like how weird it is. I like that it demands your attention, even your patience. I would have actually liked to have done a full review of this, but unfortunately I just lost track of time and that could not happen. However, seeing as how a physical release of this album is scheduled for late February, maybe at that point I will revisit the record in maybe not a full-blown review, but maybe in another segment like this, and we can talk more about that record, and I can try and figure out more about the record in that time, and, you know, it'll be a great thing, or whatever. Until that moment, I will leave you with this. It is weird, but super colorful. It is jarring, but very fascinating. It is not for the average black metal fan, but that's fine because I don't think Liturgy really give a fuck about y'all anyway. If you're looking for something very experimental, very weird, very different, definitely fucking check this thing out. If you're looking for something unconventional and unpredictable, definitely keep an eye out for this. And that's it for the Metal Meltdown. I feel like I covered a lot of music here. I really don't feel like I missed anything at all. If you feel otherwise, feel free to let me know in the comment section. And before we leave, I want to remind y'all that it is December, and therefore there aren't a lot of new albums being released, and therefore there aren't a lot of album reviews on the way. In fact, at this moment, I only have 3 planned. But stay tuned to the Metal Meltdown nonetheless, because there's lots of lists coming. We're talking about the best albums of the year soon, talking about the best albums of the decade shortly after that, and we're even talking about some of the worst albums of the year, including possibly a look at some future albums to look forward to in 2020. So as always, thank you for watching, thank you for listening. If you haven't already subscribed to the Metal Meltdown, I would recommend you do so. Press that little button down there for updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately. And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.